Wait, before you scroll away. I need you to see what happened at this dinner party. A woman in a designer purple gown poured a full cup of coffee down a maid's back. In front of 40 guests, in front of cameras, in front of the man she was about to marry. She laughed. The room gasped. But nobody, not one person in that ballroom, knew who that maid really was. And when the billionaire finally found out, he didn't yell. He didn't storm out. He did something so quiet, so devastating, that by the end of the night, his fiancée wasn't the one wearing the ring anymore. Hey friend, welcome back. I'm so glad you're here tonight. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from and which country you belong to. I love reading where all of you are joining me from around the world. Tonight's story is one of those rare ones. The kind that starts with cruelty and ends with a kind of justice that actually heals something. It's about pride, about the people we overlook, and about a secret that was hiding in plain sight the entire time. I promise you, you have not heard a twist like this one. Stay with me till the end, it's worth it. The truth was hiding in plain sight, and nobody in that ballroom bothered to look. Grace Whitfield had been cleaning houses and serving dinners in the Hamptons for 11 years. She was 58 years old, with silver threading through her dark hair and hands that had scrubbed 1,000 kitchen floors. She didn't complain. She didn't ask for more than what was owed to her. She showed up early, left late, and treated every home she worked in like it mattered, because to her it did. Work was dignity. Work was how she'd raised her son alone after her husband passed when the boy was only 6. That son, Marcus, was 26 now, finishing his residency at a hospital in Boston. Grace hadn't told him she was still working catering shifts on the side to help cover his last year of loans. She didn't want him to worry. She wanted him to focus on becoming the doctor he'd dreamed of being since he was a child, sitting in waiting rooms, watching people in white coats save lives. Tonight, Grace was working an event she'd been hired for through a staffing agency, a private engagement dinner at the Cole estate, a sprawling glass and stone mansion that overlooked the Atlantic. The host was Nathan Cole, 39 years old, founder of a renewable energy company that had quietly become one of the most valuable in the country. Nathan wasn't the kind of billionaire who made headlines for yachts and scandals. He was known, when he was known at all, for being reserved, private, almost uncomfortable with attention. Tonight he was hosting 60 guests to celebrate his engagement to Vanessa Sterling, a socialite whose family had old money and an even older sense of entitlement. Grace had been assigned the back kitchen and the coffee service. Simple, invisible work. She liked it that way. She could watch the party from the edges, admire the chandelier, the flowers, the string quartet, and go home at midnight with cash in her pocket and no one remembering her name. But halfway through the night, everything changed. Vanessa had been drinking champagne since 6 o'clock, and by 9, her laugh had gotten louder, her voice sharper. She was holding court at the center of the room, showing off her ring, when she noticed Grace refilling a coffee station nearby. "You," Vanessa said, snapping her fingers. "This coffee is cold. Bring me a new cup. Now." Grace nodded politely. "Of course, ma'am. One moment." But 1 moment wasn't fast enough for Vanessa, who had an audience now. Her 3 bridesmaids, watching, giggling, waiting to see what she'd do next. Vanessa had built her whole identity on being the woman who never waited for anything. "Are you deaf?" Vanessa said, louder this time, loud enough that heads began to turn. "I said now." Grace, calm as ever, poured a fresh cup and held it out with both hands, the way she always did. Careful, respectful. "Here you are, ma'am. I'm sorry for the wait." And that was the moment Vanessa Sterling decided to make a scene. She didn't take the cup gently. She grabbed Grace's wrist instead, hard, and in one swift theatrical motion, turned the cup upside down and poured the steaming coffee down the back of Grace's uniform. Grace gasped, her whole body flinching from the heat, the shock silencing every conversation around them like a held breath. Vanessa laughed, a bright, cruel, performative laugh, and looked around at her friends as if she'd just told the funniest joke of the night. Maybe now you'll learn to move faster, Vanessa said, tossing the empty cup onto a nearby table. This is why you people stay in the kitchen. The room went dead silent. Nobody moved. Grace stood there, coffee soaking through her uniform, her hands trembling. Not from pain, though the burn stung, but from the humiliation of being spoken to like she was less than human, in front of a room full of strangers who said nothing. And that's when a voice cut through the silence. Controlled. Cold in a way no one in that ballroom had ever heard from him before. Vanessa. What did you just do? Every head turned toward the archway at the back of the room, where Nathan Cole stood frozen, staring at the woman he was about to marry, and at the maid whose face he suddenly, impossibly recognized. Nobody could explain what happened next, including Nathan himself. He crossed the ballroom floor in long, urgent strides, ignoring Vanessa completely, and knelt in front of Grace, who was still standing there, stunned, coffee dripping from the hem of her uniform onto the marble floor. Are you burned? Let me see your hands, Nathan said. His voice suddenly gentle, almost frantic, as if the 60 guests around them had simply disappeared. Grace blinked at him, confused by the intensity in his eyes. I'm fine, sir, really, it's just. You're not fine. Someone get ice. Now. Nathan snapped the command over his shoulder without even looking, and 2 staff members scrambled toward the kitchen. Vanessa stood there, champagne glass still in hand, her face flushing with irritation rather than shame. Nathan, it's a maid. It's coffee. Why are you acting like? Don't, Nathan said without turning around. Just one word, but it landed like a door slamming shut. The guests exchanged uneasy glances. This wasn't the Nathan Cole they knew from magazine profiles. Soft-spoken, controlled, unfailingly polite even to people he disliked. This was something else. Something raw. He helped Grace to a chair near the window, away from the crowd, and crouched beside her, examining the reddened skin at the back of her neck with a gentleness that made no sense to anyone watching, unless you knew what nobody else in that room knew yet. I know you, Nathan said quietly, so only Grace could hear. Don't I? Your face. I know your face. Grace's breath caught. She studied him closely for the first time, past the tailored suit and the confident bearing, back to something younger, thinner, more frightened. And slowly, the recognition bloomed in her expression too. Nathan, she whispered. Nathan Cole. You were just a boy. The room, still watching from a careful distance, saw something shift in Nathan Cole's face, something between disbelief and heartbreak. St. Agnes, he said. The children's ward. You used to sit with me at night when my mother couldn't. You used to sing to me because I couldn't sleep from the pain. Grace's eyes filled with tears. You remember that. I remember everything, Nathan said. I never forgot you. I spent years trying to find you, and you're standing in my house pouring coffee at my engagement party, and my fiancé just. He stopped himself, jaw tightening, and stood up slowly, turning at last to face Vanessa, who was watching this entire exchange with growing confusion and the first flicker of fear. Nathan, what is going on? Who is this woman? Nathan's voice, when it came, was quiet, but it carried across the entire ballroom. This woman, he said, saved my life when I was 12 years old. And you just humiliated her in my home. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Vanessa's bridesmaid's smiles vanished instantly. Somewhere near the bar, a phone was already recording. Vanessa let out a nervous, disbelieving laugh. Saved your life. She's a caterer, Nathan, she's staff. I don't understand what you're. You don't need to understand, Nathan cut in. You need to apologize. Everyone thought they knew the truth about that night at St. Agnes Hospital. They were completely wrong. 27 years earlier, Nathan Cole had not been born into wealth. His family had run a small hardware store in a working-class town in upstate New York, scraping by on thin margins and long hours. When Nathan was 11, A car accident on an icy road left him with a shattered leg, internal injuries, and 8 weeks in the pediatric ward of a hospital his parents could barely afford. His father worked double shifts to cover what insurance wouldn't. His mother, exhausted and grieving her own injuries from the same crash, could only visit some evenings, arriving late, leaving early, collapsing from guilt in the hospital parking lot more nights than Nathan ever knew. Grace had been a nurse's aide back then. Not even a nurse, just an aide, paid barely above minimum wage, working night shifts to support her own young son after her husband's sudden death left her a widow at 29. She wasn't assigned to Nathan specifically, but she noticed him. The boy in bed 14 who cried quietly into his pillow after lights out because he thought no one could hear him. The boy whose parents' visits grew shorter as the weeks dragged on, worn down by bills and fear and exhaustion. So Grace started stopping by his room on her breaks. She didn't have much to offer. A few stolen minutes, a cup of watered-down hospital cocoa, an old hymn her grandmother used to sing. But she sat with him. She listened when he talked about missing school, about being scared of another surgery, about wondering if his family would lose the store while he was stuck in that bed. She never once made him feel like a burden. "You're going to get through this," she told him one night, holding his hand while he cried from pain the medication couldn't quite reach. "And one day, you're going to look back and realize this wasn't the worst thing that ever happened to you. It was just the thing that taught you how strong you really are." Nathan never forgot those words. He carried them through 3 more surgeries, through months of physical therapy, through the humiliation of relearning how to walk at 12 years old while his classmates moved on without him. He carried them through high school, through the scholarship he fought for, through the small engineering program that eventually led to the idea that would become his company. Every major decision of his adult life had been shadowed by the voice of a night shift aide, who never even told him her last name. When his company finally succeeded, when the magazine covers and stock valuations started rolling in, Nathan had tried, quietly and without publicity, to find her. He'd hired someone to search hospital records from that year, but Grace had left St. Agnes not long after his discharge, moved twice, changed jobs more times than official records could easily track. The trail went cold. Nathan had almost given up hope of ever thanking her. And now here she was, standing in his own home, wearing a caterer's uniform soaked in coffee, because the woman he'd chosen to marry hadn't seen a person. She'd seen someone beneath her notice. Vanessa's face had gone pale as the story unfolded in front of 60 stunned guests, several of them now openly filming. She reached for Nathan's arm. "Nathan, I didn't know, obviously I didn't know if you just told me who she." "That's exactly the problem," Nathan said, pulling his arm back. "It shouldn't matter who she is. You poured scalding coffee on a woman because she took 30 extra seconds to bring you a drink. That's not about not knowing her name. That's about who you are when you think no one important is watching." The ballroom had gone utterly silent, the string quartet long since stopped playing, every guest frozen in the widening gap between the couple that, until 10 minutes ago, had seemed destined for a perfect wedding. The silence that followed said everything. Vanessa's mother, Diane Sterling, pushed through the crowd, her face a mixture of fury and damage control. "Nathan, sweetheart, I think we're all a little emotional tonight. Let's not make any decisions we'll regret. Vanessa made a mistake, she'll apologize, and we can put this behind us before the engagement announcement goes out to the press tomorrow." Nathan looked at her, something hardened behind his eyes. "There's not going to be an announcement, Diane." "Nathan!" Vanessa's voice cracked, panic finally breaking through her composure. "Please. I'll apologize right now, I'll do whatever you want. Just don't do this in front of everyone. You didn't seem worried about doing something in front of everyone 10 minutes ago," Nathan said quietly. He turned back to Grace, who was still sitting by the window, embarrassed by all the attention now fixed on her, her burned skin forgotten in the emotional weight of the moment. "Grace," Nathan said, kneeling in front of her again, his voice softening entirely, as if the rest of the room had vanished. I owe you more than I can ever repay. You gave a scared, broken kid a reason to believe he'd survive. And I let you walk out of my life without even knowing your last name. I'm not going to make that mistake twice. Grace shook her head, tears slipping down her cheeks now, unable to hold them back any longer. I didn't do anything special, Nathan. I just sat with you. Anyone would have done the same. No, Nathan said firmly. Not anyone. You did. And that's the difference. He stood, turned to the room, and addressed his stunned guests directly. His voice steady now, carrying the calm authority that had built a company from nothing. I think this party is over. Thank you all for coming. Please see yourselves out. The staff will help with coats. Guests began murmuring, gathering purses and jackets, casting uncertain glances at Vanessa, who stood frozen near the center of the room, her engagement ring suddenly feeling very heavy on her hand. Nathan, please, she whispered, following him as he walked Grace gently toward a quieter room off the main hall. We can fix this. I love you. Nathan paused at the doorway, looking back at her with something that wasn't anger anymore, just tired disappointment. I don't think you understand what tonight showed me, Vanessa. It's not really about Grace. It's about the fact that for 2 years I thought I knew who you were. And in one moment, when you thought it didn't matter, I found out I didn't know you at all. He didn't wait for her response. He closed the door gently behind him, leaving Vanessa standing alone in the middle of a ballroom full of half-finished champagne glasses and abandoned appetizer plates, the life she'd planned for herself quietly unraveling with every passing second. It started like every other event Grace had worked. But it ended in a way she never imagined. In the smaller sitting room, away from the wreckage of the party, Nathan sat across from Grace with 2 cups of tea one of the remaining staff had quietly brought in. He'd insisted on treating her burn himself with a first aid kit from the kitchen, his hands unsteady with a mixture of guilt and disbelief that she'd been standing under his roof, unrecognized, for who knew how many events before tonight. How long have you been working catering jobs? Nathan asked. About 4 years, Grace admitted. Before that I was doing home health aid work, but my back couldn't keep up with the lifting anymore. Catering pays all right, and the agency keeps me busy most weekends. And your son? You mentioned him once that night at the hospital. You said you had a little boy waiting for you at home. Grace's face lit up despite everything. Marcus. He's 26 now. Finishing his residency at a hospital in Boston. Emergency medicine. Nathan smiled, the first real smile of the night. A doctor. Course he is. You always had a way of making people believe they could survive anything. I never thought you'd remember any of it, Grace said, wrapping her hands around the warm teacup. You were just a scared kid. I had dozens of kids like you over the years. I couldn't tell you most of their names now if you asked me. You told me something no one else did, Nathan said. You told me the accident wasn't going to define the rest of my life. Everyone else treated me like I was fragile. You treated me like I was going to be okay. I held on to that for 27 years. Grace's eyes glistened again. I'm glad it helped. I really am. But Nathan, you don't owe me anything for that. I didn't do it expecting something back. I know, Nathan said. That's exactly why I want to do something now. He stood, walked to a small desk in the corner of the room, and returned with a notepad and pen. Grace, I want you to tell me the truth. How are you really? Not the polite answer you give strangers. The real one. Grace hesitated, unused to being asked that question with such sincerity, especially by someone whose net worth could probably buy the entire town she lived in. But something about the honesty in his eyes, the same boy who used to cry into his pillow at night, still visible somewhere underneath the tailored suit, made her want to tell him the truth. It's hard, she admitted quietly. Marcus has student loans that keep me up at night. I work 6 days a week most months. My knees aren't what they used to be, And some mornings I don't know how many more years I have in me for this kind of work. But we're managing. We always manage. Nathan nodded slowly, jotting something down. His expression unreadable. Grace, I'm going to ask you something. And I need you to actually consider it before you say no, because I already know you're the kind of person who'll want to say no. Grace laughed softly despite herself. You remember that about me too? I remember everything, Nathan said again. And this time when he looked at her, there was something in his eyes that looked almost like the boy in bed 14. Hopeful, a little afraid, but determined to make things right. This is the moment everything fell into place, though Grace wouldn't understand the full weight of it until days later. I want to pay off Marcus's remaining student loans, Nathan said. All of them. And I want to set up a fund for you. Not charity, Grace, a thank you 27 years overdue. And I want you to stop working these events. Not because there's anything wrong with the work, but because you shouldn't have to be doing it at 58 with knees that hurt and a body that's tired. Grace shook her head immediately. Exactly as Nathan had predicted. Nathan, I can't accept that. Too much. I didn't tell you any of this to. I know you didn't, Nathan interrupted gently. That's exactly why I'm offering it. You've spent your whole life giving to people who never gave anything back. Let someone give back to you for once. Please. Grace was quiet for a long moment, the weight of pride and exhaustion and years of struggle warring behind her eyes. Finally, she asked the question that had been sitting underneath everything else since the moment he recognized her. Why does this matter so much to you, Nathan? It was one kindness a long time ago. You've built an entire company since then. You've helped thousands of people you'll never meet through your work. Why does one hospital aide from 27 years ago matter this much? Nathan considered the question seriously before answering. Because everyone talks about the big moments, the surgeries, the funding rounds, the headlines. But the truth is, the biggest turning point of my life happened in a dark hospital room at 11 o'clock at night, with a stranger holding my hand and telling me I was going to be okay. Nobody remembers that story because it's not dramatic enough for a magazine profile. But it's the only reason any of the rest of it happened. Without you, Grace, there is no company. There's just a scared kid who gave up. Outside the sitting room door, faint sounds drifted in from the ballroom. Staff clearing tables, the last of the guests filing out, hushed conversations about what exactly they'd just witnessed. Somewhere in that departing crowd, Vanessa Sterling sat alone in the back of a car, staring at the ring on her finger, replaying the night in her mind, searching for the exact moment she'd have done anything differently, and coming up empty because in her heart she already knew she wouldn't have. Grace finally nodded, tears slipping down her face again, though this time they weren't from pain or humiliation. Okay, she whispered. Okay. Thank you, Nathan. No, Nathan said, taking her hand the way she'd once taken his in a hospital bed 27 years earlier. Thank you. Don't blink. You'll miss what happened over the following days. The video from the party, someone's phone, shaky but clear, had already made its way online by the next morning. It spread faster than anyone at that dinner could have predicted. The billionaire kneeling beside a humiliated maid, the fiancée's cruel laugh frozen mid-frame, Nathan's voice cutting through the silence. By noon it had over 4 million views. By evening it was on national morning shows, with anchors debating what it revealed about class, kindness, and the people society trains itself not to cede. Vanessa's family scrambled to control the narrative, releasing a statement calling it a private matter taken out of context, but the internet had already made up its mind. Old clips resurfaced of Vanessa snapping at waitstaff at other events, dismissing service workers with the same casual cruelty she'd shown Grace. The pattern, once exposed, was impossible to unsee. Nathan, for his part, refused every interview request. He issued one brief statement through his company's press office. Grace Whitfield showed me more kindness as a child than most people show each other their entire lives. I hope this moment reminds all of us to see the people who are too often overlooked. Then he went quiet, turning his attention instead to the person the world had suddenly, briefly, become obsessed with, and to making sure that attention didn't overwhelm her. He arranged for a private meeting with Marcus, Grace's son, flying up to Boston himself rather than summoning him to New York. Marcus, exhausted from back-to-back hospital shifts, was stunned to find one of the most recognizable entrepreneurs in the country sitting in the hospital cafeteria waiting for him. "Your mother saved my life when I was younger than you are now in your residency," Nathan told him. "I know she spent every year since trying to make sure you never had to struggle the way your family did after your father passed. I'd like to help make sure that struggle ends here." Marcus, overwhelmed, could barely find words. "She never told me how bad things really were. She always said we were fine." "That sounds exactly like her," Nathan said with a small, knowing smile. Within the week, Marcus's remaining loans were paid in full. Not as a loan, not as an investment expecting anything in return, but as what Nathan insisted on calling, simply, a debt finally settled. Grace, for the first time in over a decade, didn't have to think about a catering shift for the coming weekend. She sat in her small kitchen in Queens, staring at a life that suddenly felt lighter than it had in years, unsure how to process a kindness this large after giving so much of herself away for so long without expecting anything back. But the biggest surprise was still waiting. Everyone thought the story ended with the loans, the viral video, the public unraveling of an engagement built on the wrong foundation. They were wrong. 3 weeks after the party, Nathan asked Grace to meet him, not at his estate this time, but at a modest brick building in the same working-class town where they'd first met, decades earlier. The old St. Agnes Hospital had closed years ago, replaced by a newer facility across town, and the original building had sat empty and crumbling ever since, a forgotten piece of a town that had quietly struggled since its factories closed. "I bought it," Nathan told her, standing in front of the building's faded entrance, hands in his coat pockets, breath visible in the cold morning air. 6 months ago, actually, before the party, before any of this. "I've been planning something, and I think you're the only person who could ever help me make it what it's supposed to be." Grace looked at him, confused. "Nathan, what are you talking about?" "I want to turn this building into a family support center," Nathan explained. "Free housing and financial assistance for families with children in long-term hospital care. The kind of support my family never had, the kind that would have meant my mother didn't have to choose between sitting with me and keeping the lights on at the store. Counseling, meals, a place to sleep instead of a parking lot. Financial aid so parents don't go bankrupt saving their kids. And Grace, I want you to run it." Grace's breath caught. "Nathan, I don't have any experience running an organization like that. I'm a home health aide. I don't have the degrees, the training. You have 27 years of proof that you understand exactly what families in crisis need better than anyone with a degree ever could," Nathan said firmly. "I can hire people with the paperwork qualifications. What I can't hire is somebody with your heart. I'll build the team around you. Administrators, social workers, medical liaisons. All of it. But I want the soul of this place to be you." Grace stood in front of the old building, tears freezing slightly on her cheeks in the cold air, overwhelmed by a future she never could have imagined for herself. "Why me, Nathan? There must be 100 people more qualified. Because you never asked for a single thing in return for saving my life," Nathan said. "Not once in 27 years did you ever try to find me, ever try to cash in on what you did. You just moved on and kept giving to the next kid who needed you and the next and the next. That's exactly the kind of person this place needs leading it." Grace looked up at the old brick building, the same hallways where she'd once sat with a frightened boy in bed 14, the same walls that had witnessed her quiet, unnoticed kindness for years before anyone thought to thank her for it. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, she let herself imagine a future built not around survival, but around purpose. "Okay," she whispered. "Let's build it." What happened after that was beyond anything either of them expected. The Grace Whitfield Family Center, as Nathan insisted on naming it, over Grace's repeated objections, opened its doors 8 months later. It offered free temporary housing for out-of-town families with hospitalized children, meal programs, transportation assistance, financial counseling to prevent medical bankruptcy, and something Grace insisted on personally: a night shift companion program, training compassionate volunteers to do exactly what she had once done for a scared, injured boy: simply sit with children who were frightened and alone when their parents couldn't be there. Marcus, now a full physician, became one of the center's volunteer medical advisors, splitting his time between his hospital residency and consulting on the center's programs, deeply moved to be part of something built from his mother's quiet decades of invisible kindness. Vanessa Sterling, for her part, disappeared from the social circles she'd once dominated, the engagement long broken, her family's carefully managed reputation permanently dented by a single viral moment that had, in the end, revealed a truth she couldn't spin her way out of. Some months later, a mutual acquaintance mentioned to Nathan that Vanessa had reportedly started volunteering quietly at a local shelter. No cameras, no publicity, just a woman perhaps beginning, slowly, to understand something she'd never had to face before that night. Nathan didn't know if it was genuine change or image repair. He decided it wasn't his responsibility to find out anymore. He'd let that chapter close. As for Nathan and Grace, their relationship settled into something neither of them had words for at first. Not quite family, not quite friendship, something built on a debt that could never really be repaid, only honored. Nathan visited the center often, not for photo opportunities, but quietly, usually in the evenings, sometimes sitting with children the way Grace once sat with him, learning firsthand what she'd given him so many years ago. One evening, nearly a year after the party that changed everything, Nathan found Grace in the center's small office, going over intake forms for a new family whose son had just been diagnosed with a serious illness. "You know," Nathan said, leaning against the doorway, "I used to think the accident was the worst thing that ever happened to me. My leg, the surgeries, watching my parents fall apart trying to keep the store running while I was in that hospital bed. And now?" Grace asked, looking up from her paperwork. "Now I think it might have been the reason for everything good that came after. If I hadn't been in that hospital, I never would have met you. And without you, I don't know if there'd be a company, a foundation, any of it. Sometimes the worst moment of your life ends up being the doorway to everything that matters." Grace smiled, the same warm, steady smile she'd once given a frightened boy in the dark. "That's what I always tried to tell you, Nathan. You just needed time to believe it. This is only the beginning. The real story starts now." A year and a half after that night, the Grace Whitfield Family Center had expanded to 2 more locations, in Ohio and North Carolina, each one built on the same simple principle: that the smallest acts of kindness, given without expectation of anything in return, can ripple outward for decades, touching lives the giver may never even know about. Grace, now 59, still worked long hours. But different hours, meaningful hours, spent sitting with frightened children and exhausted parents, teaching new volunteers how to simply be present with someone in pain. Her knees still ached some mornings. But her heart, she often said, had never felt lighter. Marcus finished his residency and accepted a position at a hospital near the center's original location, wanting to stay close to both his mother and the work she'd built. He often told his patients' families a story about a hospital aide who once sat with a scared, injured boy through the night, expecting nothing, and how that boy grew up to change thousands of lives because someone once chose to see him when it would have been easier to look away. Nathan Cole, for his part, quietly stepped back from most public appearances, letting his company's work and the center's growing impact speak for themselves. When reporters occasionally asked him about the viral moment that had once dominated headlines, he always gave some version of the same answer. The real story was never about a spilled cup of coffee. It was about a debt I spent my whole life trying to figure out how to repay, and a woman who never once asked me to. If there's a moral hiding inside this story, maybe it's this: the people we overlook, the ones pouring coffee, holding doors, working quietly in the background of our busiest, loudest lives, are often carrying more strength, more history, and more capacity for kindness than we will ever fully understand. You never know whose life you're shaping in a small, unnoticed moment. And you never know when that moment will find its way back to you, decades later, in a way that changes everything. If this story moved you tonight, even just a little, I'd be so grateful if you'd hit that like button. It truly helps this channel more than you know. And if you believe stories like this deserve to reach more people, please subscribe and share it with someone who needs a reminder that kindness is never wasted. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. I'll see you in the next story.